Today I want to talk about a concept called psychological safety. So to set this up, let's begin with a little self-reflection. I want you to think of a time when you were in a situation, so maybe a class, a relationship, a team at work, or anything like that, where you felt like you couldn't say what you wanted to say. So you felt like maybe you had to be slow to speak, or you had to be really guarded, selective in what you say. You couldn't just speak your mind. Now think about why that was. What was it that was getting in the way of you being able to speak your mind? So here's how this is related to psychological safety, and here's why it can matter to you. So several years ago, Google did some internal research to try and figure out what made some of their teams very high performing. This is an oversimplification, but one concept that came out of that research that has since become somewhat popularized is the idea of psychological safety. One thing that makes the difference between a mere group of people and an actual cohesive and high performing team is how psychologically safe those team members perceive their team to be. So imagine if there's like a brainstorming session, you're trying to tackle a complex problem. Imagine if only 2 of the 6 people in that team feel like they can freely speak their mind. Think about how inefficient that time is going to be. Whereas let's think about another team, say there's 6 or 7 people and everyone feels comfortable with each other. They feel able to speak their mind. They can put some distance between themselves and their ideas, and so they can share an idea. And if it doesn't take root with the group, they don't feel offended or frustrated. They're willing to let it go because they're invested in the outcome of the group. And they know that if they say something, they're not going to be just judged for it. It's going to be handled with care and with respect. If you have a group of people who are incredibly intelligent and high performers individually, that doesn't necessarily translate into an actual high-performing team. The ingredient that makes the difference is if that group of people has psychological safety or not. So you can take a group of other people who maybe are more average or they don't have as much of a stellar track record individually, but if they really trust each other and they have deep relationship in the bank and it's a psychologically safe environment, they will most likely accomplish great things. So what does this mean for me and for you? Think about all the different settings in your life. So think about personal relationships, family and friends. Think about your professional life and your work. Chances are it's actually pretty easy for you to think, oh yeah, that environment is safe, this environment is not safe. Like probably some things came to your mind. So the first step is, how do I know whether it's a safe environment? And I like using the leadership essential of degree of candor as a quick temperature check. Ask yourself, on a scale from 1 to 10, when I show up in this environment, whatever it is, how candid am I? How freely can I speak? Do I feel like my ideas are going to be valued? Or do I find myself being slow and selective and guarded? This isn't a good and bad spectrum. So there are some times where being selective about what we say and being slow to speak are really important and really helpful. Sometimes we need to be selective in what we say because we're trying to help someone else come to the conclusion of their own problem. Or we recognize that it's tactful or it's just not the right time to say what we want to say. And on the flip side, sometimes we can say too much, right? Sometimes we know that person who overshares and they haven't even been invited to share and they're like, wow, you are at an 11 out of 10 on the degree of candor. So it's not a good or bad, but in general, the upshot of this research from Google says that high-performing teams tend to exhibit higher degrees of candor. So first step is to assess your environment in any given situation. If you're in a romantic relationship, as an example, and you regularly feel like you're not able to say what's really on your mind because you're worried about the other person's going to react, you're probably not in a healthy relationship. Or if when you do speak your mind, the other person comes back with judgment or with ignoring it or just like flippancy or criticism, that's not a healthy relationship because that's going to drive your degree of candor down. It's not a psychologically safe space. Likewise, if you're in a team or in an organization and you recognize, hey, there's something about our culture where we don't have that psychological safety, I can't speak my mind, it's not going to be as high performing. What can you do about it? Well, it depends. If you're working in an environment or if you're in a relationship where you can't be yourself appropriately, right? We don't need to be able to be 100% all of the time saying everything that's on our minds. That's not a reasonable expectation. But if you feel like you're working somewhere where people don't handle ideas well, where people only ever do the things that have been done before, where you try to share something and it gets shot down, or you notice that other people get shot down, that's not a healthy environment, and you may want to consider leaving. you may want to consider finding a healthier place to work or a healthier relationship. But maybe that's not an option, or maybe you want to see what you can do to improve things. So step one in this is to analyze your own behavior. Do I do or say anything that may have the impact of making someone else feel psychologically unsafe? If that's the case, I need to stop doing that and replace it with a different behavior, or maybe just replace it with silence. Think about like sarcasm and teasing as an example. You may think this is just how we get along, but I was coaching a leader recently, and we talked about teasing, and she came back to me a couple sessions later and she was like, at first when you told me to consider whether teasing was toxic, I thought that's a little bit of an overreaction. We always tease each other. It's just how we get along. And later I realized that we're actually tearing each other down. It's not really injecting positive humor into the workplace. It's actually just like a constant power play where we're constantly trying to one-up each other. That's toxic. It's not helping us to learn, grow, and change. And I agreed with her. It was a really good insight. And then step two is, whatever influence I have, how can I leverage it towards greater psychological safety, where people feel more comfortable sharing what they really think and feel? People are able to be open, ideas can flow more freely, and we can learn, grow, and change more quickly and more effectively together. Having a psychologically safe environment allows our brains to relax. So rather than constantly being defensive and in fight or flight mode, we can think more freely, we can breathe a little more easily, we're gonna share more freely, and we're gonna be more open and creative to accepting others' ideas. Psychological safety is a key ingredient for healthy relationships, healthy and high-performing teams. So I encourage you, do what you can to try to be an agent of change and positivity around psychological safety. Psychological safety has a ton of benefits. I encourage you to seek it out and to practice things within yourself that create more psychological safety for the people around you. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you.